Everywhere in modern society, you are ordered to conform, and if anything, it's getting more conformist, from gender to immigration. Pick your issue. There's increasingly only one acceptable view, and you can be ostracized or fired for disagreeing. Many are, in case you haven't noticed. University of Toronto professor Jordan Peterson stands dramatically against this tide. He's become famous in large part because he refuses to be shamed from the public square for having his own opinions. Last week, Peterson left interviewer Cathy, Newman, not a genius, speechless when explaining that people do not have the right not to be offended. Watch this.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable. That's fine. I think more power to you, as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
ha, gotcha.
You have got me. You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head.
Really one of the great interviews of all time. By the way, she said Jordan Peterson has a new book out, 12 Rules for Life. That clip is everywhere. Jordan Peterson joins us tonight. It's an honor to have you, Professor. So I've watched you for a while. I've always thought you were a truth teller. One of the chapters in your book is Tell the Truth. That's one of your rules. What are some of the things that you think we're forced to lie about in this moment?
Well, I don't know if we're forced. I think we make a choice. That it's sometimes a bitter choice, but that's often the case when you're deciding what to say. But my sense is often you're in a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, so you might as well pick the poison you'd rather take. And you have a moral obligation to do that. So, you know, if you're going to say something unpopular and you're going to get attacked for it, that's a risk. But to shut up and pretend that you think something different is to warp your soul, and that's a much bigger risk. So
yes, it is. So why I would think that even if they didn't agree with you, that people in the media would be thrilled by the way you comport yourself, the way you respond, because clearly you're saying what you really think, and that's supposed to be our charge as journalists, is to tell the truth.
Well,
and yet you get met with these hostile receptions. Why do you think that is?
Well, I would say that's not universal. There's a big battle being played out in the press, say over the Cathy Newman interview. There are people who are casting her as a victim because she's been vilified as a consequence of the interview. But there's been many, many people in the media who stood forth and said that it's necessary to be able to say what you think. So it's not a battle that's over yet. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Surprising, but good.
So if you, in the book, you have a number of these rules, and Rule 5 just jumped out at me as a father. You said, here's a rule. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. What does that mean?
Well, it means, first of all, that you should understand that you are actually capable of disliking your children, and that because you're larger and more powerful than them, if you let them misbehave in a way that makes you dislike them, you're going to take revenge on them in a very bad way, and sometimes over decades. I've seen that as a clinical psychologist. But more importantly, if your children behave in ways that make you dislike them, assuming you're reasonable, and that might be something you want to discuss with your wife, then other people are going to dislike them too, other adults, and then they won't teach them things, and they won't pay attention to them, and they'll only smile falsely at them, and other children won't want to play with them and include them, and that's a catastrophe for your child. So it's very helpful to help your children behave in ways that make other people welcome them, because then everywhere they go, they're welcome. And there's nothing better you can do for a child than that.
Very smart. In the minute we have left, if you could pass on one piece of life advice, and this really is a book of life advice, to our viewers, what would it be?
Stop saying things that make you weak.
What does that mean?
Well, if you pay attention to what you say, you'll know that sometimes you feel like you're standing on a rock, that you're in a solid place, and I suppose that you're speaking from your heart. And other times you're saying things just to look good and just to buttress your particular status at the time, and that makes you feel weak. You sell yourself out. And if you pay attention to what you say, you can tell when you're making yourself stronger, and you can tell when you're making yourself weaker. And unless you want to be weaker, then I would say it's best to say those things that make you strong. And you can learn to do that, and it's really useful. So I would recommend practicing that, because it's good for you and good for everyone else too. And so
there's a reason people obsessively watch your YouTube videos. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Congrats on the book.
Thanks very much.
Google reportedly has over 100 agencies monitoring extremist content. Well, our next guest fell victim to the monitoring by YouTube, which is owned by Google, after blocking his video in over 24 countries with no explanation why they did it. The video in question was how he felt about being called a white supremacist. YouTube has since lifted the ban after pushback on social media. So why the ban at all?
Well, here now, a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, author of 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos, Dr. Jordan Peterson. Great to see you again, Dr. Peterson.
Very nice to be here.
So tell us what happened with this video on YouTube.
Well, I was speaking with a very well-known YouTube host, H3H3. It's Ethan Klein, and we talked about a lot of different things because YouTube interviews are 3 hours long. And he cut a piece of it where we discussed accusations that had been leveled at me for being alt-right and far-right and white supremacist, these ridiculous allegations, and put that video up, and it was banned in 24 countries. Now, maybe it was banned because it had the words white supremacist in it, but that's actually quite a problem because perhaps you want discussion of that. So that seems to be what happened. He complained, and they backed down. But, you know, he's got clout because he has 4 million YouTube subscribers, something like that. Yeah.
Are you a white supremacist?
No.
Why do they call you that?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, because in the world we live in right now, if you stand in opposition to the radical left, which I certainly do, then the easiest strategic move for the radical left people is to call you some pejorative term so they don't have to deal with you. Yes, well, not just to shut you down, but also to damage your reputation, to cause real harm. It's not merely a matter of shutting you down. There's more malevolence to it than that.
They want to take you out and they want to silence you.
Yeah, and they'd be just as fine, just as good if there was some pain involved during it.
Right. Do you how do you feel about some of the blowback that's leveled at you? How do you handle it?
Well, I've learned over the last year, if you're careful what you say to begin with, and I am very careful with what I say, and then if you're attacked, that you don't back down and you don't apologize, things flip around extremely quickly. And now I'm in a position where if I get attacked, it almost inevitably, fingers crossed, turns out to be of benefit to me.
Ultimately, though, the reason we're talking to you about this is apparently that Google has got this secret police of 100 agencies, and we don't know exactly who they are.
Right.
They don't identify themselves, and they're trying to filter out content.
Right.
What bothers you most about that?
Well, I understand why they have to do it to some degree, because they don't want ISIS promoting their particular brand of pathology.
And that's a good thing to take down terrorist videos.
It's certainly something that has to be contended with. I think that it's necessary for Google and YouTube and these large social media channels to make what they're doing absolutely transparent to the public. And there's two reasons for that. It's not only because of the human decisions that are involved, it's because they're building algorithms to screen things even before they're put up.
Right.
And that's resulted
I would understand if they are, excuse me for cutting you off.
No problem.
I understand if it's the ISIS video or if you're a white supremacist and you're lashing out and saying you're going to have hate crimes and this. That's putting other lives in danger. We need to take down those videos and get involved, I believe, and police needs to get involved. But what you did, it was a speech and they just took a clip and you're defending yourself why you're not a white supremacist, correct? And
yes,
they took
that's
that
what
video
happened.
down.
Yeah, well,
What's
it shows you that
that
it shows you that the algorithms are faulty. But I know lots of people on YouTube have been demonetized. That just happens all the time. If you're a conservative, center conservative, I would say, then the probability that if you have a discussion that it's going to be demonetized is extremely high. And major league players on YouTube, like Dave Rubin, for example, are demonetized constantly.
What does that mean,
as well.
demonetize?
It means that Google decides that their content is not fit for advertisers. And they seem to do that, I would say, in a very arbitrary way. Now, the issue is that this needs to be made public. We need to evolve mechanisms to determine how shared social media are going to be screened so the real pathological material remains under control, the stuff that violates law. But we need, it can't be done behind closed doors.
And look out for Facebook, too. They're right behind. They're trying to correct what they say went wrong in 2016, and many people think that's Donald Trump winning.
Right.
I want to talk about your book, New 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. What do you mean? You're fighting against chaos in our society?
Yeah, well, it's increasingly young people in particular find themselves disoriented in our world. It isn't clear to them how it is that they should grow up and take their place in the world. And I would say that's especially true for young men. And so the book is a series of rules, some tongue-in-cheek, some dead serious, and a description of why it's a description of why most of the meaning that's found in a genuine life is to be found as a consequence of adopting responsibility, and also it's a discussion of why it's so necessary to be careful and to tell the truth in a deep way, and it's an explanation of that, not just an injunction or a finger wagging.
Can you tell us one rule?
Put your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. So, and that's an antidote, I would say, to some degree, to this idea that's been fed to young people that the best thing they can do in the world is to become a social activist of some sort and complain about what other people are doing to hurt the world instead of growing up and fixing things on their own, which is a much better pathway.
Don't be afraid to listen to people, right? They have counter views. People want to shut you down rather than debate you. You want the debate.
That's rule 9.
They say you're dangerous. Are you dangerous?
Yeah. Yeah, actually.
Why? Why are you dangerous? Don't look dangerous.
It depends on when you see me, I think. Why? Because I think that someone who's trying to be good should be dangerous. Like, otherwise there's no force to you. There's nothing to contend with. You know, we have this strange idea that's especially, again, foisted on young men, that the pathway to virtue is through weakness and harmlessness, and that's just simply not true. That's the pathway to uselessness and resentment. You should be able to be a monster and then not be one.
C.S. Lewis said there are different definitions of love. There are clearly different definitions of danger, too.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much.